Special meeting for Thursday, October 15th is now called to order. Has everyone had a chance to review the agenda?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Glenn. Second?
Second.
Thank you. And all in favor?
Aye.
All right. This is, for those people listening, a single item agenda. We are reviewing and discussing, not voting on, but reviewing and discussing the learning model at Middlebrook, hearing an update and hearing the superintendent's recommendation moving forward. So Dr. Smith, I'm not sure, do you want to begin or Jory?
Yeah, what we'll do is we'll kind of just get right into it. I thought, I'll share a recommendation, explain why, what that recommendation is, what it is. And then, we'll just get into some of the logistical considerations around bringing all students back to Middlebrook. And at that point, Jory will kind of take over the conversation. I'm sure some of you will have questions about some of those pieces. And then, we'll go from there. So first of all, thank you. And thanks for taking the time tonight. As we have been just kind of monitoring our progress and monitoring transmission rates, as of this evening, it is my recommendation that we begin the process to bring all students back to Middlebrook School 4 days a week, following a model similar to Cider Mill. So that's the recommendation at the point. In terms of a target date, we haven't fully nailed that down just yet because we do have some logistical things we need to work through. But I'm looking, somewhere as early as October 26th, or kind of in between then and perhaps November 2nd. So that's something we'll have to come back to the board with a more final date as we, kind of finalize the plan. In terms of why that recommendation is what it is, as we have discussed over many meetings, we look at two broad categories of information. The first, transmission data that we have, here in Wilton, but across Fairfield County. We look at a couple of sources of information for that. We also interact regularly with both Dr. Chrissy Mackin, our medical advisor, and Barry Vogel, our town health director. So in speaking with both of those individuals, both are in support of beginning to return more students to Middlebrook School. In thinking about that first set of data, the COVID-19 transmission data, as you know, transmission rates and infection rates continue to remain low, both here in Wilton, but also more broadly in Fairfield County. Some of you may ask and may wonder, why this recommendation now, even though they're low, the transmission rates have been tipping and trending upwards in recent days, and that is true. While they are still low, they have gone up, and that's, as we're coming to a final decision and final date where we begin to make that transition, if that's the decision of the board, those are metrics we have to pay very close attention to, and both Chrissy Mackin and Barry, had suggested that we just need to continue to monitor. But at this point, the numbers are still low. I think moreover in the conversation I had with Dr. Mackin, there is, what she suggested, and it confirms kind of what I've been reading too, is that as more and more schools have reopened both across the country and around the globe, schools don't appear to be, the source of virus spread in communities. And so, we've seen, a number of cases around where, kids come back to school and we don't see these dramatic upticks in positive COVID-19 cases as was anticipated. So I consider that to be a very, very encouraging sign. And that was something in playing out her own kind of recommendation and support for bringing kids back that figured, I think, largely in Dr. Mackin's calculus. With respect to Mr. Vogel, again, he supported beginning to move students back. And again, like he did with the recommendation around Cider Mill and Miller Driscoll, wanting assurances that, in classroom spaces we'll have a minimum of 3 feet of social distance, which we will certainly plan for. Also providing those desk-mounted trifold sneeze guard barriers, as we did in the 2 lower schools. We would do that as well. So we're working on that. I think some of the differences between Middlebrook, which Jory will be able to elucidate more thoroughly on, are around our other mitigation strategies. And so one of the I think strong factors at the 2 lower schools that helps that. And, we look to our other mitigation strategies. And so, mask wearing, that continues to go very well for both students and staff. The frequent hand washing, that's another strategy we rely very heavily on. Taking opportunities when we can throughout the day to try to spread kids out. So it's not uncommon at Middlebrook to see kids and teachers, outside taking mask breaks, and kids certainly spread out during recess. But we have to continue to rely on those other mitigation strategies. Like we did with the lower schools, we have engaged Taisu Kim just to do floor map renderings for us for all the classrooms, so we can architecturally, see, what kind of space we can, assuming the numbers of kids that we're anticipating will return in each classroom. So we'll have that information to continue to help guide our thinking as well. Let me just pause there for a second. So you have the recommendation, you have the proposed timeline. I have a very brief summary of the input from Mr. Vogel and Dr. Mackin. Any questions on any of those pieces? If not, I'll just ask Jory to start talking kind of through the logistics. We can talk about some of the survey data he's got, as well as, just how we would go about doing this.
Okay, before I ask the board members if they have questions, I just want to take a look back, like just one day actually, and thank Kathy Kuhn and Jen Falcone and the teachers and the custodians and the entire staff of those 2 schools and the families for working together to affect kids being able to come on site 4 days a week. So that tremendous work, and thank you so much. And we'll hear an update at another time, but before we open it up tonight to focus on Middlebrook, I absolutely want to be sure to thank you, and that's on behalf of the whole board. All right, so Kevin paused with sort of a lot of the medical data and rationale. Are there questions, comments?
I just had one question, because you put the dates of like anywhere between the 26th and the 2nd out there, and you said along the Cider Mill model. So are you thinking of doing a grade at a time, like phasing in, or I haven't even, gotten there yet?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about some different approaches, and I think in my mind, I would start with a grade level on a given day. But I'm not as wedded to, stretching it out for an entire week. I think, there are different logistical considerations that actually favor Middlebrook, as opposed to kind of what we saw in place at Miller Driscoll and Cider Mill. Certainly the age of the kids being one of them, and their ability to respond to routines and routine changes, that kind of thing. So I think we'll come back to you with, what a proposed schedule would be. But, perhaps, just thinking out loud, maybe over the course of 3 days in a single week, if we were actually able to start on the 26th. So maybe you get like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday reduction. So by the end of the week, you've got all of the kids that are planning on returning returned.
I had a question about the medical. it is I think you pointed this out, it is a shift in thinking on Dr. Mackin's recommendation, in that she is now including basically the track record of other districts, statewide, national, even international. So I don't want that to get lost in this conversation, that's an important piece of information that it appears she's, watching other districts and their experience with bringing their students in. So I think she's now adding that to the trends. When you go to the Department of Public Health, the State Department of Education website, they have metrics as well. One of which is the number of new COVID cases, and Fairfield County is well below the threshold that the State Department of Education anyway would worry about. But there are others that, and Kevin, you alluded to it, the recent uptick in cases, not just statewide, but some in Fairfield County. And it's true, it has not yet been for 7 days, but it has been for at least 5. And it's definitely going up. So I heard you say that we need to watch that carefully. So going back to our goals, we have put health and safety first and looking at a variety of indicators. And I do not want to be anybody's wet blanket. I certainly am delighted that we can move forward and have this conversation, but with the caveat, and I think Barry Vogel and Dr. Mackin, of course, would agree that we also have to watch the numbers. And so that's why I'm glad that we're not talking a specific date tonight, that we may need to be flexible on the date and watch the trends of the data. And then the last point I want to make is we have said 3 feet at K5, 3 feet with masks and with sneeze guards. And so it seems that Dr. Mackin and Barry Vogel are comfortable with that approach at Middlebrook as well. Am I right?
That's correct.
Okay. And then I think as Jory and you talk further, I remember it took a while to get sneeze guards in and enough of them. So we must have the right barriers in place. So if somebody could talk to that and where we are in that process later on, perhaps, but that. Then the cohorting piece, I know that there are, they're not as small. They may not in some ways be as well defined as K5. So I would hope that maybe you and Jory can talk a little bit more detail about what that means. And if there were to be a COVID case, how would that be different than at the K5 or than prior when we had 6 feet of difference? Would that have a big impact or a negligible impact? And maybe that's a question for either Barry Vogel or Dr. Mackin. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can address it because we've been talking about it, even as it pertains to, potential cases at Mill or Driscoll and Cider Mill. And certainly as kids come into a classroom together and are within inside of 6 feet, what you've done is just increase the potential number of students and others who may have to quarantine for 14 days. And then if there's some mixing of the cohort, that's where the contact tracing is so important. So, if there are kids who are, crossing cohorts or crossing classroom cohorts, I should say, because they're in a particular math class or a particular music class, then again, you just expand the potential sphere of students who may need to quarantine and adults who may need to quarantine if you have a positive case.
Kevin, I just want to make sure Jory clarifies, and Jory, if you don't mind, how much crossing of cohorts, not necessarily A and B cohorts, but there seems to be a lot of crossing and mixing of students more than the other schools. Kevin alluded to that. If you could just clarify that.
Why don't we, if it's okay, well, let's, I think we'll talk through some of those logistics. What I'd like, I think it might be helpful to hear some of the survey data, just so you have that also as part of the background. And then what I asked Jory to do is, talk both about student movement through the day and kind of where kids are coming and going from out of their classrooms, as well as the, those moments in time where kids are mixing with kids from other classes. And so he's got all that data. So I think, Joy, do you want to take us through it?
So good evening, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to share some thoughts. And before I get started, I have to say great thanks to the board. We were treated this morning to some treats, and that was a very nice way for the staff at the Brook to start their day. It was very much appreciated, so thank you. I want to first piggyback on the elementary principals that started their presentations with celebration. So I do want to start there to just really celebrate the incredible efforts by our staff and our students, all really doing their very best to manage so many layers that are involved here. Teachers are being asked to do things they've never been asked to do before. Students are learning in completely different ways now. And honestly, this is hard. It's hard for students, it's hard for staff, and it's hard for parents. And yet, the celebration part of that comment is that the energy and the effort to do as well as we can has really just been so outstanding and worth celebrating. The resilience of everyone involved has just been incredible. But remembering that this is not business as usual is an important thing to keep in mind here. Teachers are constantly adapting and adjusting their craft, really doing a wonderful job with that. Because you think about a typical classroom where you have the kids in front of you, now you've got remote as well as live students at the same time. It's not the way educators would certainly recommend for us to do it, but it's obviously COVID necessary because safety comes first. And there's a lot to adapt to, and there's a lot to celebrate in that, considering how difficult it is. Students, one of the fun parts of today was asking for input from some of our leadership around the building about what students are learning. And some of those comments were the students were learning about exploring identity in others, exploring identity in themselves, and learning how to actively problem solve and how to purposefully support others. They're creating inspired class charters, and to quote one, they're enthralled by a civics exercise. Someone on this call could speak to specifics on that. Students were quoted as saying that teachers are so calm, patient, and flexible. I thought that was pretty nice to hear. They love mask breaks too and socializing with their friends, but teachers have noticed there's much greater engagement from the students right now compared to last spring. And just having students in the building is certainly a beautiful thing. The other positive here is they're great on tech support. they're the ones that know it just naturally, and they've really been successful on some Schoology issues with the calendar, et cetera. And obviously, seeing their smiles under the masks rather, has just demonstrated some wonderful love here. So getting into the surveys a little bit, sent out a survey on Friday night to parents and to teachers. And parents gave an incredible response. There were over 680 responses that's to the tune of about 83% of our parent community that responded. It was also a nice balance of grade levels and colors. Cohort A and B was pretty much 50-50 equal. But 88% of those parents that responded said that they would have their child attend Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. And there's a caveat to that. And that is, I've received over 30 emails from parents who requested that had they been given a choice, they would have said they would have chosen hybrid as a first choice. But I really didn't give them that choice. They only had the choice of either remote only or all in. And it was really an attempt to try to find out if we even had an appetite in our parent community. And the folks that reached out to me directly were very clear about they would have answered differently if they were offered that choice. So I want to just make sure I'm being fair to those folks that wanted that reflected tonight. And parents themselves said that they're about 60% of them would be in favor of allowing students to move around and let teachers remain in their room. Ruth, you mentioned that briefly tonight, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. When we surveyed the teachers, there was over 88% of our staff that responded to the survey, and they were about 50-50 on their favor to go to 4 days, the Monday, Tuesdays, Thursday, Friday. And honestly, we haven't been able to unpack that. Are the folks that are somewhat reserved in that answer? We don't know what the why is there yet. So we need to find out, dig a little deeper on that. But the teachers themselves, about 80% of them were in favor of having the students move and the teachers staying put in their room, and really specifically for the idea of that travel time between the rooms. If I take you into a classroom setting at the end of a period, they're having to rush from one room to the next, which means they're not giving the proper time to that child that's in front of them that may have that one last question, that clarifying piece that they need done, because they know they've got to be in 2 minutes, they need to be hooked up, ready to go to start that next class across the hall or down the hall. So teachers gave some wonderful suggestions of how to improve that scheduling and how the timing of classes in regard passing time and mass breaks, et cetera, that they made some wonderful suggestions that we're going to try to fold in as we move forward. The clarity of where we are right now, and a couple of you asked the question earlier and posed the questions to Kevin earlier this week, is that we have students that are moving right now for each stride period. So in the hallways, in the pods, we have students in what amounts to being 5 or 6 classrooms on a team. And so 4 times a day, meaning to a stride class and from a stride class, they're moving. They're moving from those 5 classrooms into 6 classrooms on the team to go to whatever stride class that they're going to. It's certainly carefully supervised and managed, but students are moving to and from those classes at that point. So for a specific team, it's really 4 times a day, meaning to the stride class and back in the morning, and then again in the afternoon. And then also there are a small percentage of students that are moving to and from an instrumental music classroom or to support services. And then of course our kids are moving in and out for lunch outside right now.
Right. And so George, to be clear, in addition to just the kind of, the physical movement, as you just described, kids go from kind of the 5 core classrooms into 6 stride classrooms. So there is a small number of kids to form that 6th classroom, kind of who mix with other kids from some of the other classrooms, even though they're on the same team. So when you talk about, kind of mixing of cohorts, although they're all, on the same team within the same, broader cohort, they do have that kind of daily, mixing to comprise the 6th stride class, correct?
Yeah, the big difference about our stride class right now is all the kids in those stride classes are all from that same team. So to just pick a team to use as an example, 7 Green kids are all coming from the classrooms on 7 Green and then going to different classrooms in 7 Green to have their stride class on 7 Green. They're not mixing with red and yellow that they would have in the past. So one of the things the teachers shared, and Ruth, you probably got a flavor of it today in your visit, Mandy, you will tomorrow, that the teachers talk about they're lucky to get about 20 to 25 minutes of instruction, basically from break down this classroom, connectivity, get back into the new classroom, take attendance. And attendance is probably worth taking a minute to describe, because if you can imagine in olden days when we got to be in our classrooms like we used to be, you'd look across your classroom and see 2 empty seats, and I know I see 2 students that aren't here and I can mark them absent. But attendance now is somewhat similar in that respect for the hybrid kids in person, but the kids that are on the Zoom, you've got now to go look through the list and see who is and isn't present based on that list. Then compare that to the folks that are in your class on the Zoom, which of course isn't alphabetical, isn't always the right name on it. So that takes a little bit of time to get through. And that also assumes that they can connect to the new classroom, the new devices, et cetera. So that's one of the reasons why I think we're leaning towards wanting to have the teachers stay put and have the kids move. One of the things that Karen Brennicke, our coordinator for humanities department, shared is that the curriculum units right now are taking about 8 weeks instead of 6 weeks. It gives you an idea of the impact on the curriculum based on that shortened amount of time that the teachers have. So you think about a reading class where they're only able to get about 10 minutes of reading, which is just insufficient. Same thing for writing, only about 10 minutes of writing. Again, just insufficient for the model that we want to. So as we start to look about moving towards that 4-day in-school schedule, so Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, it assumes that classrooms will be set up with a minimum of 3-foot distancing between the student desks in the classrooms, with every desk having a sneeze guard on it. The facility setup is going to take some time. We have a lot of furniture either scattered across the district or in containers and out back behind the building. And also the idea that the unit desks that we have, and that's what we call them, the desks that are the desk and chair all in one, that require some smaller sneeze guards because they're a little smaller space. The ones that we have aren't quite the same. So as we do our kind of inventory of what we do, because we've worked over the last number of years to improve the teaching space to include more collaborative setting, use of tables where kids would be working together at a table, we're not able to do that moving forward right now. So a lot of our tables, a lot of our spaces in classrooms are things that are in storage lockers right now. So the idea of having individuals, places for the students to sit is something that we have to start to look at. And if we were to put a number on it right now, we're about 14 classrooms shy of enough desks and chairs for kids across our building. And that's because we had gotten to the point over the years of just slowly but surely trying to add to the classroom tables and giving an opportunity for that more collaborative setup. Just so you know what that means is that if we were to buy desks and chairs, that'd be somewhere in the tune of between $50,000 and $90,000. So it becomes a no joke. Excuse me, I have visitors in the house. I don't think my daughter knows I'm on a Board of Ed call. Sorry. So with some of the room sizes, we can certainly do that. We need to, part of what Kevin was talking about in terms of the infrastructure of the building, that's something that we still need to do a little more homework on and see where we might be able to fit tables, where we might be able to fit tables and desks in a particular classroom. But instead of the way we have them set up with 6-foot spacing, it would be 3-foot spacing. Until we start really getting in there and futzing with it a little bit, we're gonna have a little trouble to know just theoretically what we can do. The other part of this is it would also assume a minimum distance of 6 feet for eating lunch. So what that means for us is that we would have to create new spaces for those folks that are eating lunch at the time. So for example, one issue is if we had all the students in, so in effect doubling our enrollment from what it looks like right now, we would need to create 2 lunch waves per grade level. So not unlike what they've done at the elementary model before, is half of the children would be eating while half of the children are at recess, and then they'd flip. That creates an issue with staffing, of course, because now we've got students in 2 different places where we typically would have had only 1. But again, it's going to require some strategic movement to make sure that the kids keep socially distant as we move in and out. Some of the ideas that we're playing with right now, looking at, is the idea of using one team in the cafeteria, another team in one half of the old gym, another team in the other half of the other side of the old gym. And that way they could stay as a group of students from a same team, not unlike we were talking about in the stride classes, in each of those sections. One of the things we were talking about is the possibility of furniture needs, maybe coming up with some creative ideas where kids would bring in a blanket or a towel, something to sit on when they're sitting in the gymnasium if they wanted to do that. Right now, kids are doing that anyway for the most part when they sit outside, so I don't think that would be a big switch. The other thing that we need to start to get into is the enrollment, our enrollment. We have some classes that have 25 or 26 students, and we need to make sure that we can still maintain that 3-foot spacing. Numbers wise, sounds like it'll work, numbers wise based on measuring out some of the classrooms. But really what has to be determined now is, at the moment, some of these classes have some children that are full remote. So what we have to be prepared for is on a given week, a family making a decision to change from full remote to now being in school. So we can't have a setup by way we have 24 desks in a classroom and then 3 people say they want to come in and we don't have the ability to do it in that room. So we just need to work through some of those logistics as well. But we want to make sure that we're doing this very carefully as we get through it and making sure that we're double checking all of that. Right now, we're at about 10% of our entire student body that is remote, and that breaks out to be pretty similar at each grade level, between 11 and 12% between the 6th and 8th grade. So that's a good number, 120 roughly in our school, that is going to have quite an impact on a family making a decision to make a change to go from all remote to in. So we just want to be prepared for that. Because one of the things that we want to certainly avoid as we're doing this is we want to try to avoid team changes. We want to avoid the possibility that a child's schedule would have to change. There is possibility that those folks that are remote only, we're going to have to get creative on which cohort they're going to join based on enrollment and moving. So I thought maybe I would just pause there. If I've hit on a couple of the things I know folks wanted to hear about, I have plenty more I can share, but I think I'm talking too much.
Hey, Jory, I'll start. Thank you so much. And I know a couple of us are Middlebrook parents, obviously, so we were very interested in talking with you. And kudos to your staff. It's just such an awesome group of people. My only question, from the 30 emails that you got of people wondering why we couldn't have hybrid only, and the Board of Ed also got emails. Could you talk about, I know I've talked to many parents, and in my little head, I'm thinking, how great would it be? I'm a teacher, I'm Mrs. Smith, I'm teaching, and I have, some days Judy wants to come in and do hybrid. When she wants to do remote, she can go remote. When she wants to come in, she can come in. Can you talk about why that couldn't happen? Because that's the number one question I get, is why a teacher couldn't have 20 kids in green 7 and teach some of them remote, some of them live, and just have some fluidity.
Well, if you ask, could we do it? I think it's what we're doing now. It's basically the setup we have now.
But I mean, if we go back full time and say my daughter is sick one day and she wants to opt out and do remote a couple of days, or my daughter, decides I still only want to send her 2 days a week, just would that be an option, or would it be full time, 4 days a week, or remote?
Well, I think we want to make sure that everybody's going to err on the side of caution for health and safety. Right now, we've actually had families do just that, where their child was not feeling so great. They didn't think it was COVID related, but they err on the side of caution, kept their child home, and then did school remotely on that day when it was a day they were supposed to be in person. Followed all the protocols of going and getting their child tested, making sure, et cetera. But it gives families that opportunity to, on a given day, based on a sibling maybe that wasn't feeling well, and saying, you know what, we want to make sure that your little brother or sister is not going to pass this along to somebody else. So we haven't gotten that far into the weeds. And
sorry, so would we be able to continue that, like hybrid option? I know that was a big discussion at Cider Mill and a big discussion at Miller Driscoll, people just wanting that hybrid option. Would we have an option for that?
I think
Mandy,
really
I was talking to a family, the people that want hybrid, some of it, yes, my kid's absent, they're not feeling well, take a day off, et cetera, and then Zoom in. But my understanding from at least this one family I talked to, it's really hybrid to them means the social distance within a class. So unless you have that 6 feet, bringing the kid in for 2 days and then not is, maybe it might appeal to some people, but my feeling was that the stronger objection to coming full in versus the hybrid was the 6 feet versus 3 feet. And I thought that was their worry. So for some people, that might be it. So 2 days of 3 feet or 4 days of 3 feet is really the choice they have, and they prefer hybrid of always 6 feet.
Yeah, and I guess what I would just add to that too is I've thought about it. Certainly, I think that Jory and his colleagues will have to go back and dig in with some of those families, and as Debbie was just describing, understand, what they're hoping to get out of a hybrid, whether it's the reduced density in a classroom, or if they have a particular reason for only wanting their children to be in school 2 days if everybody else is back 4. And then I guess, the other piece that is important to me is, as Jory had named earlier, and you've heard lots and lots about over the last couple of months here, is just the challenges that teachers confront in this model, and having to manage, both kids in person and, kids at home simultaneously. I know I carry, some of my own assumptions about what, that ratio that may be more effective if it's more kids in person and fewer kids at home. Maybe that's easier than if you have what we have now. I don't know that to be true. It's an assumption, but I think this is where we have to go back to the staff and really unpack some of these ideas and understand, really clearly what the benefits and what the real challenges would be as we come to trying to, make some kind of additional accommodation if it's even possible.
Yeah. So would it be, there would be teachers teaching remote only, or would it be students would be in the classroom remotely?
And so we would have essentially the model we have at Cider Mill now, where teachers would be, responsible for kids in person, and I would assume a small handful of kids at home as well. And just it's an important point to raise because beginning here at the middle school, teachers they differentiate by their specialty and by their certification, and so when you contemplate setting up, if you were going to have a remote only class, that has, really serious staffing implications. And I don't think that the numbers play out. And again, this is something, Jory and his team could look at more carefully where, teachers could have an entire section of remote only kids. That is something that I think we had started to look at early on and then opted to go with the model we have now.
Got it. Well, thank you, Jory. I know it's a lot, and thank you to all the staff and teachers at Middlebrook.
Thank you for saying that. It's been great, really great.
Yeah,
Dan,
if
you
I
had a
may-
question?
Yeah, if I may, to go back to your case that you presented, it is not, I can't imagine it would be possible in a classroom to go 2 days a week, 6 feet apart, next 2 days, 3 days, whatever, 3 feet apart. It is what it is. So those parents that are insisting that it's only 6 feet apart or we're not going, well, they're just going to have to go totally remote, not a hybrid, but just completely remote. Because you can't keep switching the classroom back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, 3 feet to 6 feet, 6 feet, 3 feet.
No, as we wrote, way back when we put our first plan together that went to the state, when you're contemplating having, a full school, 6 feet is just not achievable in any class we have.
Right.
Jen, you had a question?
Debbie, I think Mandy, to your point about the hybrid, I think the issue was what Debbie is saying. I think the issue is them not wanting to have as many kids in a classroom. They wanted to have fewer kids. Jory, my question for you, and I'm not in favor one way or the other. I'm just asking you a question. Teachers, I know they're in favor of staying where they are. And in some respects, I do agree that makes it easier for everybody. I guess my question is, we're now going to have multiple kids switching in the halls, which now we've got a bunch of kids at the same time. Are we going to have to stagger which classes are moving at which times? And then are our kids taking their sneeze guards with them? Do they have their own sneeze guard that they take everywhere? And do we also have to wipe down a desk every time they get to a new classroom?
Great questions, Jen. Thank you. So the part of it is done by the kids coming out of one room at a time to go into the next room on team. Probably the orchestrated version of it looks like teacher in the pod area saying, all right, who's coming out for Mrs. Noble's class? You're going to be in this room. Who's all right, next room, who's going to have art? And they just come out one room at a time, and that's how they rotate. I would imagine that we do something somewhat similar to that kind of process so that there's not a lot of kids in the hallway, not a lot of kids mingling. As far as the sneeze guards are concerned, we've actually taped them down to the desk. Big reason being that if you were to sit down at the desk with a sneeze guard with your laptop and maybe something to write, you'll knock it right off. It just falls right off the desk. They're very, very, they're as light as a heavy piece of cardboard.
Okay.
So the expectation, the assumption is that the kids, when they come into the classroom, are grabbing a wipe and then they're wiping down the space that they're about to sit in. And the reason for that is they're now responsible for the space that they're going to go and sit in, and they would wipe that area. There are some kids that do that every day. There are other kids that have never touched a wipe and never have done it. As much as we've encouraged it, as much as we've offered it, as much as we've said, hey, here's the container, grab a wipe. So it's really been contingent on kids' ability or willingness or care, for that matter, about the wiping down. The other part of that is in rooms where we have that option of maybe 6 or 8 kids, the teachers are careful to just make sure the kids are not sitting in the same desks where they can. So they're spreading them out a little differently. So I think there may be a little bit of that where the students walking into the classroom and knows that this is a desk that's been empty today. So they're less worried about going in and wiping it, although we still encourage them to do that.
Right. So I guess if we're all in, then maybe we'd have to make sure our kids are wiping everything down,
Yes.
if possible.
Well, it's honestly, I think it's an everyday battle. I can't claim that teachers are telling them every single time, but it's certainly been high alert for everybody to make sure that that was communicated. And I think that we just have to keep re-communicating over and over and over again to making sure that kids are taking care of themselves in that regard too.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments?
I'm happy to hear that 88% of parents, well, I'm happy to hear that many parents responded to the survey and that the majority wanted the kids to come back. The 50% of teachers, just could you talk about how are you having an additional survey with the teachers, or, you know, I know it was similar at Miller Driscoll and Cider Mill, and now everyone seems to be happier that the students are back. So I'm not surprised, but if you could just talk about that to acknowledge those teachers who are nervous.
Yeah, and I think I said that earlier. If I didn't, sorry, but that's certainly something I want to unpack. I want to find out, you know, the folks that are on the 50% no, what's the no? What are you worried about? And trying to understand the why. Because if it's an issue of the same thing we've been talking about, the volume of bodies in the building, and I'm just concerned about it. I have a family situation and I'm concerned about just that many more people in the building. We need to figure out what that is. The folks that are saying that they do want the kids in are saying that, hey, we've got a bit of a track record in other districts around us. We've got a bit of a track record in our elementary school for the kids that have come in. So therefore, let's start down that path ourselves to say, all right, we're at a point now where we can start to have kids move, and we can trust that if we're staying on top of the cleaning, that things will be okay.
Awesome. And then, because we've had so much discussion about it from other parents, could you talk about Wednesdays? I know there's been multiple emails and discussions about, could we bring kids back on Wednesday to start getting more in-school days for at least half the cohorts? Or could you just mention that, what your thoughts are around that?
Yeah, it's again, one of those things, you know, Kevin and I chatted briefly today, and that was one of the many things that we covered, was just talking about, as we start between now and roughly beginning of November, to think about what things are going to look like. I'd want to be careful not to make too many changes in any one change. You know, if a change here is going to be towards the end of this month, beginning of next month, that we're bringing all the kids back, I think we've got to preserve Wednesdays. Right now, the way we have Wednesdays set up, that's a really long day for our staff already, because after teaching for the first 4.5 hours, then they're on some kind of call like this until 4:30, 5 o'clock. And it's a brutal day for teachers. But what they're doing is they have that opportunity for some professional development, for working with their IETs, which is their professional learning group. And we also have meetings on those days, whether it's a staff meeting or program days, et cetera. So it is chock full of a lot of things that we've filled Wednesday afternoons. And so it's important to recognize that if it's not on Wednesday, then where's that going to land, and what will that schedule look like? So it's certainly something we're going to have to look at over the next couple of weeks.
Okay, I think because we are a one item agenda tonight, Wednesdays, to me anyway, is a larger discussion because it touches all the schools. So if we don't mind, let's just focus on Dr. Smith's recommendation and Jory's description of Middlebrook 4 days for now. And we can take Wednesdays up at a subsequent meeting. So are there other comments, questions, observations, concerns from any other board member? Jen.
Can I ask one more question?
Of course.
Jory, talking about cohorts switching, I mean, cohort A moving around the team within, like, they're not just stuck in that one class. If we have right now we have what, maybe 50 people roughly?
Yes.
on a team at a time.
Yeah.
Of those 50 kids, how many of them are crossing? Do you know that number off the top of your
Well,
head? mean, is
I
it
think
close to-
if I understand what you're asking, crossing meaning within the team,
Within the team.
pretty much all of them. It's a rarity if a child would actually stay in a room, but that they may just be because that stride teacher's coming to them. But
Okay.
I
And they still
think,
have other kids coming in from a different classroom.
sorry, you got cut off there.
Oh, that's okay. But they still have other kids coming in from another classroom.
Right. It's basically 5 classrooms that are expanding into 6 rooms across the team.
Right. My question to not beat around the bush is if we've got 50 kids, if those 50 kids are actually crossing, even though we didn't think they were, right? If I thought my 12 kids were in my 12 kids and they maybe only came in contact with a few extras, right? So maybe at best my kids have 20 kids that they come in contact with. And now we're going to move an entire team. I'm just trying to figure out, we've had a lot of questions about, well, wait, if we do this, that means they're now in contact with how many additional kids? So that's where I'm getting the
So
question.
I could talk through it for a sec if you want, because so for example, if you think about 100 children on a team right now, and it'd be roughly about 100, 110 otherwise, minus some remote kids. So I think to ballpark it being about 100 plus or minus kids is about right. But for an individual student, so if Jory is in Mr. Panoli's classroom and then he's got a stride class somewhere on team, I'm moving maybe next door to Mr. Schwentz's room. I am moving into that room and I'm walking by, maybe a handful of kids, a handful of number of kids are walking by me. It's not quite, but potentially double the amount of kids that are walking past at that point. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yep, that and right. So our kids, if you go into 6 different major classes, right, you're now with 6 different groups of kids, in addition to your specials that are changing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out, is it really that much of a difference as opposed to what our kids are doing now?
I personally don't think it is. You know,
Right.
when you think about in the course of a day right now, there are these 4 moments that I've tried to articulate before: going to a
Yep.
stride class, coming back, that this is happening. Now we've tried to orchestrate that as best we can to some very degree of success across the building to start. I think we're getting better at it, but to making sure that to the best we can to keep kids apart from each other. But
Right.
you know, our kids are social beings in a very, very healthy and good way. So that's quite the battle to say, no, keep your distance, keep apart. So,
Right. Okay. All right. Thanks.
you're welcome.
Anyone else? Jen? I'm sorry, Gretchen?
To follow up on that though, I'm curious because there are kids that are in different cohorts that maybe are in music or band, or I'm sorry, chorus, band, that spend more time together. Like I am less concerned with the people crossing each other, but the ones that are spending time together that weren't initially in the cohorts together. So can you talk to that a little bit?
Sure. So it's, I kind of hate the term cohort, if I'm being honest, because when we think about the team as a cohort, I think that's probably a healthier way to look at it, because even the children that are going for instrumental music are all from the same team. Typically, in olden days when we were in regular school, red, yellow, and green would come together, and that instrumental music class would have kids from all 3 teams. Now it's just from that same one team. So when they go to their stride class, when they have it, it's going to be just those same kids from those other rooms on the same team each time they go to and from.
Okay, that clarifies it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
If I may, you know, our objective from the beginning was to really try to bring our students back in as reasonable a manner as possible and as soon as possible. And I think we've demonstrated both at Miller Driscoll and Sauter Mill that we've been able to do that reasonably successfully. Now we are talking about Brook, and it's going to be a challenge as it was at the other 2 schools. Logistically, it sounds like it's really a nightmare, and there's a lot yet to figure out, from acquiring desks and doing whatever. But we need to do it. We need to get our students back in school. And we have to have the faith and the trust in our staff and our administration to do it in the best possible manner. You know, we've demonstrated that already at the other two schools. And things could happen. There's no doubt about it. We may have a problem. We may have an issue. And we'll deal with that. We'll handle it in the most effective way possible, address whatever the situation is, put in the right fixes, the right changes, and do whatever we need to do. But we really do need to get our students back in school and being with each other and teaching face to face, our teachers and their students. I mean, it's critical right now. And both Kevin and Jory, you got a lot of work to do. It sounds like you're well on the way to figuring things out. And I trust that you will do so in the best possible manner. There's no doubt about it. So I just say, let's keep going. Let's keep moving it forward. And as soon as we can, with all the right protocols in place, with all the right issues addressed, we need to do this. We need to get our kids back in the classroom.
Okay, Glenn, I think that's well said. This is a single item agenda tonight. This was to review it and discuss it. We know what Kevin's recommendation is. We've heard the planning that's going on behind it. So I'm going to assume, based on our questions and our comments, that we want Kevin and Jory to proceed on the plans as described, and that we support that. You know, we will not really sort of vote to make it official or formally support the recommendation until next week. And maybe by then we can have just a better sense of the timeline and a better sense of the trends. And I think a couple of questions for next week would be, what are the staffing implications, you know, as you figure out and you try to unpack more precisely who's actually going to show up versus who would prefer not to, but would do it if they need to, you know, that sort of thing, and get a little better handle on what might make some teachers feel more comfortable, figure out the moving, you know, who's going to move between classes, the teachers or the kids. So, you know, sort of bring us the more of the details, the finer details, and the fine tuning that you do between now and then. But you have our support, at least that's what I'm assuming, unless I hear otherwise from a board member, to move ahead full steam with your planning. And then we'll meet again next week and just hear the fine, you know, the last details that we need to. And just with my little personal caveat, which is a big one, is we always say health and safety. So we do absolutely need to keep Dr. Mackin involved, Barry Bogle involved, and keep looking at the trends, because they are what they are. And we need to watch those, and we've always said we would do that. All right, so that brings us to the end of our agenda. It's a short agenda tonight. We did receive many emails. We absolutely read every single one of them. I know a few of them were wanting to be for public comment. We don't have that for tonight, but we can carry it over until next week. So anyway, so we've got through our agenda. We know when we're meeting next. I want to thank everyone once again for the yeoman's work that our leadership and our faculty do. Truly outstanding. I think Kevin described it to me earlier as we were going through the agenda, was, you know, slow and steady. Seems to have been working well for us. So thank you for taking that approach, and so far so good, and let's hope that continues. So I'm going to adjourn the meeting and thank everyone, and see you next week. Thanks.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
All right, good night. Thank you.
Thank you.